Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to be sharing our first culture asynchronous session uh, for, I guess, the category of e-school discipline, and I think more broadly put and appropriately put, the idea of how we best support our students to make excellent choices in e-school. This is a system that we've worked on over the last couple of months, frankly, in reflection from what worked well in the spring, what did not work as well in the spring, based on a lot of our feedback that we've received from students, from staff, over the course of both prior to e-school and within e-school. And hopefully this gives everyone the abilities to feel confident in giving students clarity, both in expectation, in supporting great choices, and also in supporting both students and our staff to be able to respond well in cases when students don't. So an overview of today's session is to share some foundations of restorative practices, which really will ground our work in eSchool over the course of this school year. To review the expectations and choices we hope that students do make, including a review of some named common classroom expectations for virtual learning, as well as some unexpected behaviors and choices that we want to look for. We want to give an overview of the three levels of managing these behaviors in eSchool, resources for restorative conversations, as well as completing the collaborative problem-solving referral form, and where to get the resources I'm sharing with you today. I want to start with a quote here, is that restorative justice can't just be a set of things that we do. And this is a professor, Kathy Evans, who says it has to be the framework for how we view teaching and learning. And restorative practices have always grounded us at DSST. At the same time, we've coupled those with systems that were, again, fundamentally rooted in restorative work, but certainly in an in-person setting have both looked and felt differently at times, and in some cases our reflections and feedback would demonstrate that some of them have not fulfilled that restorative promise at all times. With that being said, we also operate in a very unique space in this virtual way. We're not physically around students. The vast majority of student experiences live through a classroom versus the hallways, and therefore so much of what will help to encourage the right choices that students we want them to make is going to be the relationships we have with them, both as teachers, as advisors, and in some cases, but hopefully sparing cases, the relationships we will need to have as administrators who support both teachers and students in responding to poor choices. So restorative practices grounded in the idea that choices that are made that are in violation of what we expect don't just do harm to the quote-unquote rule itself, but frankly do harm to the relationship between the student, the staff member, the staff, and the student, and in some cases, even if families are involved, all the parties above. So restorative work is really a big piece of what we're going to work on as a team this year. And I want to share with you some of the tools and resources that we hope to be able to use to support that. So this is going to, again, be something I share at the end of the presentation in the PowerPoint, but also it is going to be shared with you in the invite and the links where you attended the session. But this document here is a overarching student expectations resource guide. And I would love your feedback if it feels best to embed that into our school culture hub, and would be certainly easy to do that to kind of continue to consolidate our resources. So some of the common expectations that I'm not going to read out loud to you, but would encourage all of us to read, include naming some explicit expectations about what we want for students in all of our classes. I think it's super critical that in the first few days of school, you find your own authentic way to share these with students and to ensure that they are aware of what the expectations in your room are around things like technology and the ways in which we operate with it. Some of those include computer setup, so how we set up the computer, what they have open. Again, clarity is really helpful. It's also appropriate from a trauma-informed perspective to be really clear proactively with what we expect students to need to be successful. Some guidance around the use of camera, and full disclosure, I've begged, borrowed, and stolen some of these ideas from our fantastic colleagues at Byers. In fact, two of our former co-workers, both Natalie and Akeem, but also this is a bit of a blend here. You might see the language which I'm seeing right now, call your shot. That's what that's the language that they use. I would say like advocate, like respectfully advocate, proactively advocate. So the second one is, if you know that you're going to have to step away, just like we ask of ourselves, to just notify the presenter, hey, I got to step away for a few moments. Some notes about what we expect when the camera is on, where students should be seated, how we should be able to see them. Dress code, there are some very explicit baseline expectations. We're not expecting students to be in uniform, but you can certainly read the language. Credit to Ms. Natalie Jung for supporting the buyers team in creating some of this language explicit to dress code, but it's a very foundational, I think what everyone would hope to be incredibly reasonable set of expectations, and just naming like what would be truly not acceptable in a dress code sense. Video background, we do want students to actually be able to choose their backgrounds, and as long as they're appropriate, further guidance would be given here as to whether we even require it. In some cases, schools have chosen to ask all students to do this for reasons of equity, so as the backgrounds of their home are not factored into the ways in which students view one another. Use of teams, some general guidance here, practice and participation, which again is something based on grade level teams and guidance across teams to determine the ways in which we expect students to participate, and time urgency in terms of we are promoting students to be both on time, honoring transitions, advocating for personal needs, that calling your shot concept, and teaching students to be able to do so proactively, and then using technology in general guidance with our acceptable use policy. What is super critical, and I want to emphasize, is this column here about rationale. Rationale is so important to be giving students, and one of the places that we heard in last year's student panel in the spring, when they spoke with members of our home office in our school, is that a lot of students just did not see the through line between what we've asked of them and the roots that we would say were the reasons for that expectation, whether it should always be our core values and our mission, but even more intentionally, why are we asking this of you? Why is this what we believe to be in the best interest of your learning and ability to thrive at our school? Read through the rationale. Some of these do include some supportive measures, and some of those will continue to be developed. Also within this document, there's a separate tab here for some of the misplaced behaviors, and in some cases just unacceptable behaviors that students may choose to engage in. This summarizes some of them here, so all of the previous tab here, some of those would certainly reach the level of disruptive in the classroom, and some of those absolutely just need to be coaching. If a kid is not positioning themselves in an optimal spot for their camera to be looking at the class, that's not a reason to consider any sort of disciplinary measures. It's a coaching conversation. But there may be examples where students do not meet those expectations in that previous tab, chat bombing, for example, inappropriate use of audio, inappropriate behaviors that may take place that disrupt the classroom environment. In some cases, again, refusal to go camera on. I would say first instinct is not to see that as a disciplinary thing, but more of an inquiry to figure out what's going on. Why do you feel uncomfortable? Some of us do as adults. How can we work towards getting you to more comfortable? Inappropriate video backgrounds, not responding to outreach in class, not proactively advocating for their needs, and then computer use violations. I'll fix that. It says buyer's handbook. It's also going to be in our student handbook that have been shared with families. Harassment and bullying, peer conflict, critical incidents, which refer to a more complex set of responses than simply an automatic notification to a dean. These refer to incidents in which somebody feels less than or oppressed or othered based on the actions of another. This is not something that at this point we have a fully developed response system to, and that's not due to lack of desire, but in fact a desire to wait for students to return in a couple of days to help us build an appropriate response system that meets the needs of all parties in our school. Academic integrity, and then potential relationship conflicts that exist between teachers, students, and possibly family. So those are some of the expectations. I encourage you to read through those to know that those are what we would refer to as common school expectations for all of our students to meet. I want to talk about what we will think about as the 3 levels of response. First, we're not using Compass in eSchool. We're not going to be using the language of refocus, silent lunch. We're not using Compass to track. We've consulted across the network, we've got an input, and don't believe that that is the right choice at this time. However, we do want to think about ways in which we are both being responsive to data, that we are also ensuring that you, as the instructors, are the ones who have the authority and the relationships to see challenges through. And so our system is designed to ensure that the majority of interactions that go astray from expectations are handled by the instructor in charge of the classroom. And short of a couple of areas that do require notifying, at the very least, an administrator, virtually everything I'm going to share with you can be addressed by you as the instructor, and in fact is greatly encouraged using effective restorative justice practices. I'm not going to read through this whole document. It will be shared in what you received today, but one of those is just highlighting the 3 levels. Level 1, the idea that it's a student and teacher relationship that needs to be the place that this gets solved. This does not require nor needs dean consultation. It's not something that administratively gets tracked. Certainly within your classroom, we will encourage you to think of ways to keep track of these conversations, whether it be through records of your emails or chats. If you would like further ideas on how to track it, we will be working on some different templates that teachers may be able to use to track internally to them. Level 2 is where you consult with the dean, an administrator, to get ideas on how to have a restorative conversation and decide on the right steps, but that is one in which the teacher and the student ultimately solve together. It is tracked, and you will use this referral collaborative problem-solving referral form I'll share with you in a few moments. And then level 3 is where it's really a facilitated conversation between a dean and teacher and student. I will be clear too that this does not mean that it's incident 1 is level 1, incident 2 is level 2, incident 3 is level 3. And in fact, to show you what I'm meaning by that, if we scroll down here, and this chart is also found on the tab that you see right in front of you here, is let's take, for example, a student who has interrupted class several times with an inappropriate sound or something that's distracting intentionally. The first time, that's an absolutely a level 1 intervention. And I would say a level 1 intervention is where the least part of least invasive interventions has kind of been extended to. Now this requires like a one-on-one chat. For the most part, many of these can be addressed by a quick redirect via a chat, a one-on-one link to the student. Say, hey man, why don't you chill out for a moment and stop doing that? It's disruptive. Those types of interventions are not level 1. Those are just best practices. This would refer to a situation in which a conversation is needed. First time the student does that and the least invasives don't work, level 1. Second time, it could be level 1 or it could be level 2. Third time, additional times, again, it could be level 1, 2, or 3. There's no reason for this to be a ladder, and in some cases, students may just need more chances to have those conversations with you to fully understand that you're not going to give up the high expectations you've set for your students. There are some incidents that do require a notification to the administration and to deans, and that would be harassment, that would be bullying. Those 2 are places in which you may still ultimately be the one to have the conversation with the student, but we at least want to keep record and track that, and in fact are required to do so as administrators. Pure conflict, level 1 to 3. There is some definite range in which this exists. Pure conflict, that moves straight to harassment, degradation based on race, identity, sex, gender, etc. That's going to be a level 3. Same process as the level 2. The level 1 might just be a kid who's picking on somebody a little bit, who might be even his friend or her friend, but it just has exceeded the bounds of what's acceptable within a learning space. Again, we're here to consult with you if you're ever confused about what level. I'm not going to go through the rest, but I think the point here is that we do hope that most infractions, most choices, I should say, are met with a level 1 response, as that keeps the authority, that it keeps the relationship, and that creates the trust between you, your students, and your entire class. If there is a situation that results in the need to have a conversation with a student, if you click this link, it's again found in the same large spreadsheet document. But these are just some questions that you could consider using. I've placed a couple of different prompts in here. And in most cases, I personally go through a lot of these questions. It's not usually one or two, it's usually all of them or most of them. These ones here include one-on-one conversations, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, this would be one in which you may, as an advisor, need to facilitate a mediation between two parties. Take a look at this. Many of us have experience with restorative work. The goal, again, is to find that there's not a single truth, but there are two truths, and the goal is to find the shared truth between them. As an adult, that means these are not conversations where you come in utilizing the inherent authority you have as the adult to prove you were right and the student was wrong. In fact, it's a conversation that can be done thoughtfully, empathetically, and if there are places that we as adults did not set up the student for success, we need to be able to ask that question about what could I have done differently? Okay, I'm willing to do that. What are you willing to do? Let's work together and we can come out of here with a good plan. So restorative conversations definitely cannot exist if there's a huge power dynamic between you and the student, which already exists, that get further heightened or exacerbated by the way in which we question. We're going to find some time to practice this in upcoming weeks, but in the meantime, these are some good prompts if you do need to utilize these in the early days of the school year. If you have to complete what we would refer to as a referral, and yes, we're using some language that says collaborative problem solving, but what I want to be really clear with is that no referral should ever exist where the teacher passes the student up to a dean, the dean and the student and the family meet, the teacher's cut out of it, and then you walk back into the classroom or sign on to the classroom and don't know what happened. That's a responsibility that both Nicole and I share. Any administrator who addresses discipline with a student needs to ensure that the student and teacher are involved in that follow-up process. So if you do feel as if this is something that has reached this level 2 or level 3 level, I guess that's redundant, but if so, then you're going to fill this form out, which is linked in several places, both in the slideshow I'll share. It's also found literally on its own tab. When you're filling this form out, a couple things to highlight. Please fill it out completely. Student's first, last name, ID number, all of that can be found in Infinite Campus, which you'll need to have open because it also allows you to identify a student's race, because we do want to be tracking to ensure that we have equitable discipline outcomes from the ways in which we address things administratively. Student strengths and things that are going well. Super important to frame things from that standpoint instead of being deficit focused. Students with exceptionalities, we will share this with teams in the next week about who has 504s and IEPs. In some cases, these are somewhat tricky to identify if you don't have access to that form yet, but we will make sure that you should have all this information. Super important for us to be tracking that as well, since we're not using Compass, and we do need to ensure we are equitably serving all students regardless of ability. This populates into a data sheet that we will use and makes everyone's life easier if you can do this accurately. This is the way to identify what the concern is here, and the additional context and description gives you a chance to describe it as objectively as you can. Super important. If this is one of the situations in which you have, I'm going to make this viewer only. One of the situations in which you have previously addressed things, a couple things are helpful. One, screenshots not of the incident only from the day you're submitting this, but any previous incidents. If you ever have level 1 conversations with students due to what they've written in a chat, save that chat, screenshot that chat, put it in an email to yourself and say, conversation with Josh, 8:13. Send it to yourself, and that means if you ever do need to send that information to Nicole or myself, you'll already have a record of that screenshot. That does not, unfortunately, fit into the form. You can submit that separately via email after this. Please also note previous interventions, especially for anything that's not an automatic level 2. So that would be pretty much anything outside of bullying and harassment, which do not need previous interventions per se. It's really critical that you are sharing with us what steps were taken before. And truly an intervention. Obviously, talking with students does not mean I said hi to the student the day before and they did something today, I talked to them. No, it's more intentionally about addressing behaviors prior to the referral itself and describing that. Based on the outcome of this, Nicole and I will look over it to see if this kind of meets a level 2, which would be a coaching conversation. That's not the right word, even just a conversation with the teacher and us, and then having you set up to respond to the student and, as appropriate, the family. If it's a repeated issue or a high enough level issue, it will be a mediated conversation involving the dean, the staff, and the student and family when appropriate. One last thing to note with this is if you feel like it's an immediate issue, we will also be sharing with you a Teams chat link that includes the culture team or referral team that will automatically notify multiple people so that we can ensure somebody addresses them. We're going to go to a couple more points here, and that's really just the last one here is where do you find this information? It's going to be shared in this slideshow. It's going to also be shared in the asynchronous work completion deliverable tab. I know that's a lot in a short amount of time. I hope this is helpful. Nicole and I are here as resources for you. We're here to answer any questions, and we're here to support you. If you're worried about, oh, this is not level 2, should I say something, or I don't know if it is, please err on the side of communicating. We'll work with you to determine, hey, next time, you know what, totally you can handle that at the level 1 place. And that's what it takes. It takes our willingness to trust each other, to work through challenges, and to support our students as a result of all of that work we do as adults. Hope today was helpful. Please reach out with any questions to Nicole or myself, and look forward to a great school year utilizing the practices that we have laid out here. Thank you all so much.